echoes of eternity.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi and welcome. You're live here with me on Revolution Radio. I'm your host, Paul Stevenson, on this Monday, the 27th of February, 2017. And I am delighted and I've been looking forward to this guest. We have Michael Jones, or Mike Jones, as he's more commonly known. And he is the author and publisher of Culture Wars magazine. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Paul.
How are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Well, I've been trying to sort out my Skype for the last hour, and I thought we might not even be able to do this, but it just suddenly got working in the end. And I'm delighted to have you on. I know from my Facebook that there's quite a few other people are excited and looking forward to having you on. You've certainly got your fans, Mike.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you want me to leave the picture on or turn it off?
No, that's fine. It's fine. I mean, I can see you. But I mean, obviously, it just goes out in radio, so it makes no difference. But yeah, it's good to see you as well. Where do we start, Mike? I guess, let's start with Nikki Haley's United Nations bullshit, if you don't mind. Excuse my language. Do you want to comment on that? I mean, it makes the.
You'll have to explain to me what that involves. What's going on?
Right. Okay. I'll just quote it for you, and then I'll give you the floor. She said the first thing I wanted is, this is about 4 days ago, I think, when UN Ambassador designate Nikki Haley listens while testifying on Capitol Hill, Washington, Wednesday. Sorry, this is actually January the 18th. It's going back a little bit, but I want your comments on it. She said the Security Council is supposed to discuss how to maintain international peace and security. But at our meeting on the Middle East, the discussion was not about Hezbollah's illegal buildup of rockets in Lebanon. It was not about the money and weapons Iran provides to terrorists. It was not about how we defeat ISIS. It was about how we hold Bashar al-Assad. It was not about how we hold Bashar al-Assad accountable for the slaughter of hundreds and thousands of civilians. No, instead, the meeting focused on criticizing Israel, the only one true democracy in the Middle East. I am new around here, but I understand that's how the Council has operated month after month for decades. I'm here to say the United States will not turn a blind eye to this anymore. I am here to underscore the ironclad support of the United States for Israel. I'm here to emphasize the U.S. is determined to stand up for the UN's anti-Israel bias. We will never repeat the terrible mistakes of Resolution 2334 and allow one-sided Security Council resolutions to condemn Israel. Instead, we will push for action on the real threats we face in the Middle East. Goes on to say that, Iran is the biggest supporter of state-sponsored terror and blah, blah, blah. What is going on with Trump? I mean, domestically, it's, he's the same guy that I wanted, that I supported. The same nationalist movement guy, generally speaking, same as the Brexit, bringing back jobs, all the rest of it. The media are attacking him on every level. To me, that's a good sign that he's on the right track. But with foreign policy, we've got the same Zionist agenda, both for the neocons and the neoliberals. And it's just this continued buildup of troops around the Russian border and the war drums beating for Iran. So I'm kind of, increasingly losing confidence in Trump and when it comes to his rhetoric about non-interventionism and a change in foreign policy,
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a huge contradiction here. The campaign that he waged was based on a very simple principle. It was called America First. America First was harkens back to the 1930s when people like Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford tried to keep America out of the war.
Yeah, proper nationalists, you mean?
That was brewing at that time. So but what these two men and Father Coughlin had in common is they were from the Midwest. And the Midwest was the manufacturing center of the United States. So it harkened back to the traditional understanding of America, going all the way back to Alexander Hamilton of protected manufacturers. And in this sense, America was the opposite of Great Britain at the time. Great Britain was the great free trade country. What we needed to do at this point was keep cheap English manufacturers out of America. Okay, that was the position all the way through the 19th century, really wasn't all that disputed. Okay, that's what I saw when Donald Trump came to South Bend, Indiana, which is where I live. Biggest rally in the history of South Bend, Indiana. All the people there were the people who basically had lost their jobs through outsourcing, downsizing, and the general attack on labor that began with the Reagan-Thatcher era and Paul Volcker, head of the Fed, around 1979, 1980. They all woke up to the fact that they had been given a bad deal and they wanted out of their bad deal. And they came and they rallied for Trump. Trump went on to win the nomination. He won the primary in Indiana because of that. He mentioned Carrier air conditioning. It got a huge round of applause because Carrier Air Conditioning, an Indiana manufacturing company, had just a week before announced it was moving its plant to Mexico. So huge uproar against Carrier. Carrier has since backed down because of Trump. They're not relocating their plant to Mexico. And this is the part that Trump got right, okay? A lot of the companies have decided they're not going to relocate, outsource to cheap labor markets around the world. Because if they do, they're going to have to pay a tariff. That's what he said about Carrier. Okay, you want to bring them back in? Well, you're going to pay a tariff. And that immediately eliminated the economic advantage of cheap labor. So that's the main reason people in Indiana voted for Donald Trump. Now, as I said, if you're going to evoke America first in the 1930s, you're also there's a foreign policy component to this. And that was, again, was withdrawal from foreign wars, or let's not get involved in foreign wars. And again, this goes back to the founding principles of the United States of America. You can find people like John Adams or George Washington saying we shouldn't go abroad seeking dragons to slay. In other words, let's just stay at home. Let's avoid these foreign entanglements. That's the other part of America first. Well, Trump hasn't figured this out, evidently, because what we're seeing now that he won the election, now that he was able to mobilize all of this support, is that he turns out he's typical New Yorker, it looks like. You know, like the New Yorker's view of the world. New York has always been foreign policy oriented. This is the Rockefeller branch of the Republican Party. New York is finance. Finance and manufacturing were at war during the 1930s because finance is a way of taking over manufacturing. Henry Ford knew this. Okay. Apparently Donald Trump doesn't know this. Okay. So now we've got a situation where the foreign policy contradicts the domestic policy.
It certainly does.
Because you got basically the New Yorker view of the world, and the New Yorker view of the world is kind of this knee-jerk Zionism, which we're seeing in all of his foreign policy appointments. They're all, in my humble opinion, disastrous, because it's going to undo the whole, whatever good you're going to do domestically is going to be undone through your reckless adventurism in foreign policy.
Well, he's either duplicitous or he's deluded, because there's no chance he's going to be able to have a more, positive relationship with Putin, all the while carrying out the same Zionist rhetoric and the threatening narrative towards Iran. Those two things just simply can't be reconciled. It's a bit like saying, I want to be friends with you, but I want to beat the shit out of your best friend. I mean, it's just, how does that work?
Well, first of all, now that Trump is elected, what you saw throughout the elections period, and now even afterwards, is an attempt to overthrow the election. There's no other way to get around it.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, what we're seeing here is a replay of what happened in 2009 in Iran. 2009, Ahmadinejad was president. He ran for re-election, and all of the internationalist forces in Iran hated Ahmadinejad. And it got to the point where it just as with the Hillary Clinton election, they kept talking to each other to the point where they convinced each other that no one in his right mind would ever vote for someone that they didn't like. This is what happened to the chattering classes in America. And then when he won, there was this claim that, well, it couldn't possibly be a valid election because we didn't like the guy. So therefore, there must be fraud. So therefore, we're going to expose the fraud and overturn the election. That's what happened in Iran. They got pretty far with it. The NGOs acted as the money people behind them wanted. They got huge demonstrations out on the street. It was a color revolution. Green was the color. They got a huge number of people out. And when you get a certain number of people out, the next phase, according to this playbook, is you shoot the people that you brought out onto the street, and then you blame it on the government. And that happened as well. At Basiji headquarters in Tehran, someone got shot. They blamed the government. Nobody knows who shot them. And at this point, there was a revolution ready to happen, and suddenly the supreme leaders stepped in, certified the election, and it was over. It ended. Well, that's what's happening here. They even have their own color. The color is purple. And Hillary Clinton showed up wearing purple with her husband. He was wearing purple. And this was supposed to be the color revolution. Soros money was being poured into NGO operations like Black Lives Matter and MoveOn.org, which is supposed to be a peace organization. And but the demonstrations didn't materialize. So you can't really shoot people if you don't have a huge demonstration. So that kind of failed. And then there was an attempt to sway the Electoral College, and that failed. And then what we had was this CIA-sponsored operation of associating Trump and his people with Putin, with Russia.
Yeah.
That somehow Russia mysteriously influenced the election. And then there's these alleged videotapes of Trump engaging in perverse sexual activity in some hotel room in Moscow or St. Petersburg. Well, that was all fake news, as we call it.
Yeah, total fabrication, yeah.
And the CIA was behind this whole fake news campaign. And so what happened is the CIA got discredited. But these are powerful people, and you can't just say, oh, they're discredited. No, they may be because of that. But the fact of the matter is that we are now in the middle of a civil war in this country between Trump and the CIA and all the people that the CIA represents. So
Yes.
how that turns out is anyone's guess.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, he's looking like the real deal when it comes to, domestically. And although, I mean, I don't even know where you'd call him right wing. I mean, he's pretty center, isn't he? I mean, if I was looking at America in the same way as if I had my way in this country, I'd stop all immigration, not just illegal immigration, quite frankly, looking at the numbers coming into the UK, and it's probably pretty bad over there as well. But what I'm saying is, do you think is Trump's probably not the most educated man? Would we agree on that?
Yes.
Okay. We would agree that certainly from an establishment point of view, he has been part of that. From a business point of view, obviously he's mixed with a lot of the Jews in New York. He's got far too many of them around him for my liking. But do you think he signed on to this continuation of the Zionist agenda with the foreign policy right from the start, or do you think he's ignorant and been given and fed disinformation to keep this facade going? Because again, there's no way he's going to be able to have this non-interventionist attitude and a good relationship with Putin, all the while supporting Israel, because these guys are just mad dogs who are just hell bent on domination in that region.
No, I don't think he had a clear idea of foreign policy.
It's ignorance then.
He spent his entire life building casinos or hotels.
Right.
Okay, that does not really help you understand what's going on in the Middle East. As you've mentioned, he did it in the Jewish dominated capital of finance in the United States. So you can't get to the top of the real estate business in New York City without dealing with Jews. Okay, so I think he became what they call a legend in his own mind. Okay, that he felt that he succeeded, so therefore he knew things when he really didn't know things. And one of the things I think he felt he knew was how to deal with the Jews, which maybe you do in New York City, but that New York City is not the world. That's always the problem that people in New York City have. They think that they're the center of the universe, and what holds there holds everywhere else. Well, that is not the case with Israel. I guarantee you that. I guarantee you that Israel is a pariah nation. And the proof of that was this recent United Nations resolution, where basically the entire United Nations condemned Israel for its continued defiance of international law in building settlements.
What's new?
And the Obama administration refused to veto it. Now, this is a big deal. It's a big deal in the same way that the Iran nuclear deal was a big deal, because it's a setback for the Israel lobby. So instead of understanding the big picture, Trump decides he's the opposite of Obama. So he's going to approve what Obama rejected. So he immediately tweets out that
he's going to be the great savior of the persecuted Israel.
Yeah, well, this was really stupid. It was really stupid because it shows you a complete ignorance of the situation in the world, but also I think it shows an ignorance of the tenuous nature of Benjamin Netanyahu and his position as prime minister. I think the Israelis are sick of Benjamin Netanyahu. So at the same time this happens,
they're not that sick of him though, because ever since that state was since its inception, you hear this all the time. Everybody in Israel, they don't want all these wars. Well, they keep voting in these, Zionists, Jewish supremacist maniacs.
I understand that, but he was involved in a corruption probe.
I know he was, yeah.
Which may have been an indication that they were trying to get rid of him.
Right.
And I think that there is widespread feeling that Netanyahu overplayed his hand with Obama. I mean, the Jews have been in rebellion against Logos since the foot of the cross when Jesus Christ was crucified.
Yeah, I know.
And they told him to come down from the cross if he were the Messiah. So they don't understand limits. They're not good at understanding limits. And the one Jewish virtue is known as chutzpah, which is basically violating every sense of limit so that you can shock people and get them to concede things that they wouldn't otherwise concede. Well, that's what Netanyahu did with the Congress. I mean, he came and spoke before Congress without the invitation of the president, completely alienated Obama and the Democratic Party, and as a result turned support of Israel into a partisan issue, which is a big mistake from his point of view. Basically, it became a Republican issue as opposed to a Democrat issue. Now, that has calmed down a little bit, but that's how he overplayed his hand. And Trump was too stupid to understand what was going on. Trump's foreign policy, it seems to be simply it's a reaction to his misperception of Obama's foreign policy.
Yeah, because
that's the problem.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day. I was thinking perhaps the reason that U.S. foreign policy seems so confusing at the minute is because maybe Donald Trump is confused, because he seems confused.
He is confused. There's no question, and there's no one around him to clear up the confusion. Now, normally,
but but he has too many Jews around him. Let's face it. I mean, these people, when it comes down to it, when the rubber meets the road, they're a supremacist clique. They've got so much power, and it's the big elephant in the room. No one's mentioned it. I'm sick and tired of even hearing. Someone even said to me, and someone I respect, he said to me, Paul, he said, just call them globalists. If we call them globalists, we'll get the bad Jews. And he said, don't carry that cross. Don't crucify yourself talking about the Jews. your life won't be worth living or something like that. He said, in the long run. And I thought about it. I almost felt relief, and I said, okay. And then I went away and I thought about it. I thought, nah, because this isn't identifying the problem. This is only going to prolong the problem. And if you don't identify it, because it's not the way I look at it is it's not a case of get the globalists and you'll get the Jews. If you deal with the Jews, you'll deal with the globalists because they're what's driving it.
Yes. We have to get to a point where we can talk about this group of people. As things stand right now, anyone who criticizes a Jew is called an anti-Semite, and that immediately excludes you from polite discourse. Well, there are consequences when you do that. There are serious consequences when there's a very powerful group whose name you're not even allowed to mention. And the foreign policy disaster of the United States, which has occurred during the 21st century, is a prime example of what I'm talking about. Prime example of what I'm talking about. And so, this is something that has to be corrected. But in terms of Trump, it prevents him from understanding the problem.
It's so frustrating because he's an authoritarian personality, as you know, and you know fine well that this is exactly what they hate more than anything.
Well, the Jews don't like Trump. I mean,
no, of course they don't.
You read any of their papers, they think he's the next Hitler.
They're just lucky he's stupid.
There's always another Hitler around the corner, and he's the Hitler du jour here in America, according to the Jews. So you'd think he'd wake up and understand at least who his enemies are. Under normal circumstances, when someone becomes president, the CIA will take you, come in and we'll give you the briefing, and this is the intelligence briefing, and this is the way things stand. Well, things are not normal here because Trump doesn't trust the CIA, and he's got every reason not to.
No, he doesn't. Yeah.
Because their agenda is not his agenda. But that means, okay, you're not going to listen to the CIA. That's fine. That's a good idea. But you still have to have some type of understanding of what's going on. And you have to have a superior understanding to the one that they're trying to promote to you. And there's no evidence that he does when it comes to foreign policy. That's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with this? Well, we're not dealing with it. And basically what has happened now is a foreign policy vacuum. There's a hiatus. There's a gap here, which in some sense is good, but in some sense it's bad. Now, in January, both John McCain and Lindsey Graham, the two main Zionist warmongers in the United States Congress, both went to the Ukraine and told the fascists who are now the leaders of that government to attack the Russian support in the East. Okay, told them to do that. And
that scumbag should be arrested, but anyway.
Anyway, so that's what these people want to see happen.
All right, mate, we're going to break. We're back in about 3 minutes. Hi, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're live here with me, Paul Stevenson, on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com on this Monday, the 27th of February. I'm on Facebook at Paul Edward Stevenson. If you want to donate to the show, you can do that at Stevenson_P5 at sky.com on PayPal. And I'm with author and publisher of Culture Wars magazine, Mike Jones. Mike, you back with me?
Yes. Yes.
All right.
A small point here, Paul.
Go ahead.
There are at least 5 million Mike Joneses out there. So if you want to reach me, it's E. Michael Jones. You have to, it's just, there are too many Joneses out there. Sorry.
That's all right. Well, I've got a similar kind of name, which is why I use my second name, Paul Edward Stevenson, because Paul Stevenson's a very kind of ubiquitous kind of a name as well. Yeah. So, E. Michael Jones. I just know you as Mike Jones here when I'm talking to you. So, yeah, where were we? I mean, it's I really wish I didn't even want to even have this whole stuff going on with the Jews. I really don't. But, I was just before I came on the show, I was watching RT. And I couldn't, it's like EU presidents to block, quote, hate speech by members from being broadcast. And it immediately goes on to have an interview with a guy called Wayman Bennett, member of UKIP and founder of Unite Against Fascism. And I was like, okay, let's hear this. He said, we defend freedom of speech, but we don't defend people's right to deny the Holocaust. There are limits on free speech, and this needs to be applied to Holocaust denial. Holocaust denial in most European countries is an illegal act. There are laws in place for hate speech. Those people can be prosecuted, and they should be. I mean, it's just, so it's hard to sort of think, oh, this is just a general, hate speech thing. When it goes straight away on, it's just, in other words, there's a ban on, freedom of speech does not apply to people who question the Holocaust.
Right. That's the problem.
It is a problem, and I just think, if people don't, the history of Europe, and I just think that ultimately, if people do not start calling a spade here, there ain't going to be a country. You ain't going to have your careers and your friends and your relationships to protect. It's just going to, prolong the suffering into a slow, miserable death for Europe and the US. These people are just satanic wrecking ball, and, until I just think it's just going to be not only cowardly but ineffective to keep calling them globalists. You're going to be looking around and saying, where's the globalists? Where's the globalists? How can you spot a globalist like that? I mean, there's no, you know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know. I mean, I just find it very frustrating at the minute, Mike,
Yes.
When I look at Trump, and I just think same old stuff, and certainly in foreign policy anyway. And then as you've outlined what he's trying to do at home, it's just constant. You think these guys would let up on him a little bit, considering he's supporting their cause overseas, or the same Zionist agenda overseas, at least? You think they give him a break, but they don't, do they?
Well, you think he would understand who his enemies are, but apparently he doesn't. I mean, all you have to do is read the Jewish press, read the forward, read what they have to say about Trump. They think as I said before, they think he's the next Hitler. Well, why? These people are trying to destroy what you're trying to do. There's a coalition of people who are simply trying to destroy Trump, and they're part of it. No matter whether he's got a Jewish son-in-law or not, that doesn't change the fact that the Jewish people, this mobilization of the Jewish people is against him, and that's always the distinction. It's existed since the foot of the cross. It was the Jewish people who crucified Christ, okay? Doesn't mean every Jew in Jerusalem cried, crucify him. No, it didn't. I mean, the Blessed Mother didn't cry, crucify him. St. John didn't cry, crucify him. There were Jews who supported him. They were afraid and so on and so forth. But it doesn't mean every Jew did, but the Jewish people did. And they did it in a solemn way. And the Jewish people still exist, okay? They have different names. They're not called the Sanhedrin anymore. It's major Jewish organizations, or the leadership committee of major Jewish organizations, whatever you want to call it. It's still there, and they're still there to basically mobilize the Jewish people as a weapon. And the little Jews get sucked into this operation, and they get stepped on, and they're constantly being made fearful of one. This is why IPAC exists. It's why, you know the organizations, B'nai B'rith, the AJC, all these organizations, the ADL, they're there to keep the little Jews in line so that they can mobilize power and bring about their own political goals.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting.
We're not allowed, and the Goyim are not allowed to criticize them. And that's basically contradicts everything that we say we believe, both as Americans and Englishmen. The Americans say, well, we have First Amendment, freedom of speech. Well, yeah, but, and that quote you gave is an example of yeah, but. Well, why? Where is it? Did it say in the Constitution that you can criticize the government, but you can't criticize the Jews? That's all we're talking about. That's all we're talking. It's not anti-Semitism. It's not hate speech. It's none of that type of stuff. When you come right down to it, we're criticizing the Jews. We don't like what the Israel lobby does. We don't like the takeover of foreign policy that took place under the Bush administration with the neoconservatives, which is a Jewish operation. Why don't we have the right to criticize this? And secondly, how can we bring about any type of change if we can't criticize the people that created the mess in the first place?
Well, exactly. And they've got a total monopoly in the media. If Trump was a true nationalist, he would start looking in the direction of getting the country, getting the back control of the money supply of the country, which would mean the deconstruction of the Federal Reserve. I mean, these are the core foundational things, aren't they? When you look at the 20th century, when you have the Federal Reserve Act and then the Balfour Declaration, just the two death kneels, the beginning of the end for what was essentially any peace in the world and, a really true free United States. These people have got government-backed license to just print money out of thin air.
I deal with the creation of the Federal Reserve Act in my book, Barren Metal. It's a history of capitalism as the conflict between labor and usury. This covers a period that begins with Florence in the 15th century, goes all the way up to the present. And over that period of time, I think that the idea of money changed. Okay, it used to be little pieces of metal, and it's not that anymore. And we can't go back to having money being little pieces of metal, gold and silver, and so on and so forth, because there's not enough gold and silver in the world to cover either the creativity of human labor, or negatively compound interest. And you put those two things, those two forces have been at odds ever since there's been economics. And you're not going to solve this problem by going back to gold. We have to understand, we have to have a more sophisticated understanding of money. And money, I don't know whether this is getting far afield here, but money is credit, and it's credit based on the future labor of the nation, because labor is the source of all value, and it's guaranteed by the sovereign. That's what money is. You don't need little pieces of metal buried in your backyard to have money. But usury has never changed. It's still a sin, and compound interest is still as destructive now as it was, 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago when someone first discovered it. It will wreck any economy. Debt, a floating loan, according to compound interest, will wreck your economy. It's what happened in England. That's why I'm an American and you're an Englishman, because they founded the Whigs founded the Bank of England in 1892, and by 1776, let's say 1760 or something, they had a floating debt that they couldn't pay back. And so they decided, well, let's have the Americans pay it, and that led to the American Revolution. So what we're talking about here is the pernicious effect of usury throughout history, and it's still with us,
It certainly is. I mean, what's the national debt over there?
It's trillions and trillions of dollars, and we've had added trillions, 3 or 4 trillion simply by these reckless wars in the Middle East most recently.
What's your predictions then about going forward with U.S. foreign policy? As I've said, it's going to be, they've failed to overthrow the Syrian government because of Putin.
Right.
So I don't see how, if their ambitions for Iran is based in any reality, because.
No.
But
No.
Do you think they'll try it?
Well, it's who's they? If you're talking about the Congress or John McCain or Lindsey Graham or the warmongers, they are desperate. But if you're talking about Trump, no, we're talking about something different here. There is, because of the civil war I described, there's a vacuum right now. And because of this vacuum, power is not being projected in the way that it would be if there were a smoother transition. And that means that the United States has pretty much lost the initiative in the Middle East. I think they've already lost it. I think actually they lost it toward the end of the Obama administration, when basically the Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks got together and held a peace conference and didn't invite the Americans. They lost it when the Russians entered the Syrian war in a serious way.
Yeah, and there's some serious propaganda.
When they fired those cruise missiles from those ships in the Caspian Sea, the Russians gained the initiative, and they haven't lost it. And so the situation has changed dramatically in the Middle East in a very short period of time. And so I think specifically, what I understood recently is that Netanyahu visited the United States because he has to cash in on Trump quickly. Asked Trump for a green light to go into Lebanon. Trump gave him the green light, but apparently the word got out, and then Hezbollah announced that if Israel enters Lebanon, that they will take out Dimona, take out the nuclear reactor, the Israeli nuclear reactor. So this is a shift. It's a technological shift. I mean, warfare, the technology of warfare changes on a constant basis, but there are some points where it changes dramatically. So, like a classic instance of what I'm talking about would be the invention of what we call the machine gun, or what the English used to call the Maxim gun. When Kitchener went back to the Sudan to avenge the murder of Chinese Gordon, the Mahdi army attacked, and you had 80,000 guys on horses and camels waving their scimitars, and they charged into Kitchener's machine guns, and they got mowed down. And Winston Churchill was there to write up the report in the River Wars. That was a turning point, because suddenly the English had the technology that basically allowed them to rule the world. It didn't last long. It didn't last long because Kitchener was still in charge during World War I. And at this point, Kitchener and Churchill got together again, and they decided they're going to run the British Navy, the invincible British Navy, through the Dardanelles and break the blockade that Turkey had over the Black Sea. They didn't succeed, because World War I meant that suddenly the other side had the same guns that you had, so they lost their technological superiority, and that they lost the war. They lost that, or certainly the Gallipoli campaign, they certainly lost that. And so there's always these changes going on, and what was the answer to the machine gun? It was the tank. Well, now the tank is obsolete because now we have missiles. Hezbollah has missiles. They stopped the Israeli incursion into Lebanon in 2006, 500 yards. The Merkava tank couldn't make it past 500 yards into Lebanon. There's a stalemate. There was a stalemate. And now I think the technology, there's a change in the technology of warfare. And I think that's what we're seeing now. The situation has changed dramatically in the Middle East.
Well, I mean, I suppose there was some reason, I suppose, for optimism when Trump distanced himself from moving the embassy and also, to Jerusalem, and also he sort of backtracked a bit on the Israeli settlements a little bit, didn't he? Again,
he did. That was the first thing he said in the press conference. So the question is, are the adults in the room going to be able to get to Trump and save him from himself?
Well, this is why I think, that he. Sorry.
I hope he listens to our broadcast. Because because the adults are going to have to take him aside and say, no, you can't do that. It's not going to work now. This has happened throughout the Obama administration. His great achievement was that he didn't attack Iran. I mean, Netanyahu's been beating the drums on this for years.
That's why they hate Obama more than anything. I mean, he couldn't have bent over backwards for them anymore. It's just that he didn't attack Iran.
Yeah, and that's because the adults got to him. I'm talking about the generals who understand the military dimension of the situation, and they're saying, no, it's not going to work. You can talk all you want, but it's not going to work. And I think, if anything, that situation has gotten worse from the American point of view.
I just think it's going to be very difficult for Trump, both domestically and with the foreign policy, considering just how many Jews he surrounded himself by, including even being married into his family. I mean, it's not even just his daughter being married to Jared Kushner. Both his sons, Donald Jr. Is married to Vanessa Hayden, who's a Jew. Eric Trump is married to Lara Yonaska, I think her name is. She was I don't know where she still is, but she was a producer for CBS show Inside Edition, and they had a Jewish wedding ceremony. And I just think both, when it comes to domestically, when there's leaked information and he's not knowing who to trust and what's going on, there'll be little Jews around him, and they're the most cunning people that have ever walked the earth, and they'll be slipping information, and they'll be directing responsibility and blame to someone else. And I just think he's not going to know where he's coming or going, He's also got, Vice President, Michael Cohen, the executive president. Jason Greenblatt of his, this is in his company. He's got Alan Weiselberg. Far too many. I just don't see how. I wouldn't trust these people as far as I could throw them.
Yes, I understand.
And I've just come to the conclusion that it's best just to be calling these people out as directly as possible. I mean, I don't know. Can you? I wasn't even thinking about it, but can you get arrested in this country and in the UK for denying the Holocaust? It looks like the EU are trying to make that to be the case. I mean, I've never heard the likes of it. Just by questioning something, and then of course we had the whole. I think some of this stuff. Maybe you can answer to this. Do you think there's a growing awareness and irritation and frustration at this whole Jewish problem, both in the US and elsewhere? Because you had this whole Jewish cemetery issue, and I'm not condoning that; it's a horrible thing. But you have the vice president turning up because you've had a vandalist act on a Jewish cemetery. Do you really think if that was a Catholic graveyard that the media would have been all over it, and the vice president would have turned up in solidarity?
No, the problem here is you never know who does these things.
I don't think it was a Jew.
Oftentimes, the Jews themselves are the first one painting swastikas on synagogues. It's fact. It's simply a fact.
Yeah.
That they often stage these kind of false flag operations.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
To generate the sense that there is a huge amount of anti-Semitism out there.
Yeah.
So you don't know who did it. But if you're saying, is there resentment growing? Yeah, it is. And oftentimes it finds expression in other ways. For example, I'd say, political correctness is in many ways a Jewish creation. And There's a reaction against political correctness. And they understand that. They understand that the first form of control is controlling the mind of the people, which means prohibiting certain thoughts. That's the first principle of psychological warfare, is prohibiting certain thoughts, getting you to do that to yourself. So with the Trump election, the whole structure of psychological control is now being called into question. The CIA is kind of like a symbol of this, but the other great symbol would be the mass media, which are controlled by Jews, and now he's undercutting their credibility, challenging their credibility. And so as a result, the Jews are going to be upset. I don't care how. It's not a question of whether your daughter's married to a Jew or not. That's not really the issue. There's always going to be a Jew who, will side with you on certain things. It's not a question, as I said, of individual Jews. But the Jews, the Jewish power structure has declared war on Trump, whether he's got a Jewish son-in-law or not, because they control the narrative and he's challenging their control of the narrative. So therefore, they're going to be enemies. And he's got to wake up to that fact sooner or later.
But yeah, no, I totally agree about the cemetery thing. That's the first thing I said. I said Mike Pence probably had that appointment in his diary a month before the gravestones were actually vandalized. But just a more another sympathy act, another pressure.
Well, we don't know who did it. Wow. It's like that whole epidemic of arson with black churches down in the South in the United States a couple of years back. The Southern Poverty Law Center just turned that into a huge fundraising campaign.
Yeah. Well,
we don't know who did it. And it turns out, some of the arsonists were black. So it could be just a personal grudge. It could be a false flag operation. It could be any number of things. But once it gets into the media, they immediately orchestrate it into a campaign so that we're supposed to shore up this failing conventional narrative. But I think it's too late. Because once they lose credibility, they're not going to regain it again anytime soon.
All right. On a more positive note, we had, I don't know, did you see the CPAC, the Bannon strategy at the talk at CPAC? And then we have Trump boycotting the White House correspondent dinner.
Yeah.
There's certainly, he is making war on the press. And of course, they're just using that more fuel for the fascist Nazi.
These terms are wearing thin, but I mean,
yeah.
That's an example of what I'm talking about. Bannon is apparently the architect of this campaign, and they are, I think, pretty successful in challenging the mainstream media kind of dominance over the conventional narrative. You know, they're challenging that. It's already been in the making because of, you know, the type of thing that we're doing here now. There's alternative sources of information now that weren't available years ago. Yeah. So all they're doing is strengthening that position by challenging, you know, their version of the media. Things like polls, for example. Polls were wrong. Polls were wrong with Brexit too, because polite people won't tell pollsters what they really think. You know, it's that simple. So even if you ask all these people, they may not answer. They may not be honest with you. And in a sense, why should they? Why do they have to be honest with you? So that's another challenge to the whole conventional narrative.
Yeah, there was actually what's his name? The MSNBC host. What's his name? He came out and he said, he actually said it's the media's job to control exactly what the people think. That's what this guy said.
True. That's exactly, he told the truth for once.
What's his name?
Is it Chris Matthews?
I don't think it was him. Anyway, one of them. So yeah, the media is losing. Well, it's lost so much credibility in the election run up anyway. But they have not let up, have they? If anything, they are even worse now than they were when.
Well, they're in a struggle for their existence.
Yeah,
I think that is the reason for this note of desperation that is creeping into this whole thing. And apparently, all you have to do is ignore them. I mean, this is what Trump is doing, or you know, I'm not going to your party, and it dealt them a blow. You know, when you get there, everything's supposed to be chummy because basically that guy was right. The point of the mass media is to control the mind. It's not to inform you; it's to control you. And now we are awakening to that fact, and they don't like it.
No, they certainly don't. In the last 5 minutes, just your predictions for, because domestically and with foreign policy, I know that's a big ask, but do you think things are going to settle down? Nigel Farage, I heard him last week. You know, he thinks that, you know, within 6 months things are really going to settle down and people are going to start to love Trump. Can you see that happening? I'm not convinced. I thought it would have settled down by now, but I mean, these people are out protesting, and they're, you know, a mob is just mobilized every time Trump says anything controversial, and it's just driven by the media, and they're just like a bunch of robots out marching at every opportunity.
If you're talking about street demonstrations, I don't think they're going anywhere. It's just not. It's not going to happen. If you're talking about the battle, someone's got to win. Someone's got to win one way or the other, or otherwise there'll be just this standoff, and I don't think they can tolerate a standoff where they can't project power one way or the other. It will create a vacuum that I think they would consider too dangerous. So someone's got to resolve this conflict. I don't know how it's going to happen. They're going to sit down and they're going to say, because if he were smarter, he could demand certain concessions and there could be a modus vivendi, but he's not smart enough in terms of foreign policy to say, this is it. And maybe I'm missing something here, but to say we're not going to attack Russia. It's that simple. We're not going to do it. You've got to accept that fact, and now we're going to move on.
Yeah, and we're not going to attack Iran either.
Yeah, and that's the big question, because sometimes I get the sense that he would like to scapegoat Iran as a way of making peace with Russia. That's not going to work, but I sometimes think that may be the plan.
Well, I just don't see how that's going to work, considering the alliance and, you know, the fact that Russia and Iran are such great allies. I just don't see how that is even logical.
Well, that is always the strategy. Is always to divide your enemies. So you would make, you make concessions to one, and you make demands on the other, and you hope that the one will accept your concessions and the other will overreact to your demands, and split them apart. That has been the goal of Anglo-American foreign policy ever since Alfred Mackinder.
Yeah, I don't see Putin falling for that one. I think he's a bit too astute.
I think they understand that too. So the whole point of Anglo-American foreign policy is to divide the Eurasian landmass. And the irony, of course, is that they've united the Eurasian landmass.
Exactly.
Their stupidity.
All right, Michael, better let you go because we've finished the hour.
Thank you.
All right, it's great to speak to you. There goes E. Michael Jones. I'll give out your details again on the other side as well, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, God bless you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.